I think we were asking too much of people. We were saying, hey, ship fast, it better be good, and you better maintain your tests, and your CI better be always passing.
Welcome to the Agentic Review, the podcast where we explore what good code really means in the age of AI software development.
I'm Nina Ndukwe, Developer Relations Lead.
And I'm Itamar Friedman, the co-founder and CEO of Kodo.
So let's get into it.
Today, we're joined by Amir Rustamzadeh, partner at Firestreak Ventures, a fund at the frontier of developer tools and AI infra, where he combines hands-on product instincts with AI-native engineering skills to help founders build durable companies, like Kodo. He spent 4 years at Cypress before he began backing the next generation of tools.
At Cypress, he founded their developer experience function and created the DX engineer job title at a time when nobody had it. Then watched Vercel, Netlify, and the rest of the industry follow. He now backs companies like Lovable, Modal, Daytona, and Haze Labs. And he's deep into agentic engineering himself, running over 1,200 end-to-end tests on his own Claude projects.
So full transparency, his portfolio includes Kodo, and he got skin in the game in this conversation, more ways than anyone else. Amir, welcome to the show. Without further ado, let us know, what did we miss?
No, you got it all. You captured the full sense of it all, and thanks for having me on.
Let's start with a bit about your background. I think you coined the term developer experience almost at Cypress, at least, and built the function from nothing. I think you said that you kept searching in LinkedIn and looking like anyone that held that title. And looking back, what are you actually solving for back in the days, and what do you feel it was missing? And maybe you can take it also what it means for us today, like in the age of AI.
At that point in time, there was a bit of a renaissance of developer-focused companies. These are kind of companies we now take for granted today, but not long ago they were kind of the pioneering and the kind of the cool companies at the time, building stuff for developers like no one had ever thought to do before. Historically, building for developers wasn't necessarily like something you would start a company around. It was always relegated to the large companies like a Microsoft or something like that, where they kind of owned the language, the IDE, the place you run the code. I mean, don't even get me started on like open source, right? So and so we kind of entered this era, I would say, man, probably past 2010, where we start to see this stuff start to change. We got more open source activity, and I think that led to a lot of new companies being formed around those open source projects. And so it was a great time. I think it was a very fun time to build developer products and developer tools. But at the same time, I think the industry had not really toiled with what it meant to build an org that builds stuff for developers. We were kind of trying out the cookie cutter playbooks of like, this is what a PM looks like that hands things to engineers, and this is what marketing looks like for. It was just all cookie cutter. And at Cypress, we were growing really quickly, and we kind of had to figure all these things out as we went along. But I quickly realized, man, I feel like the old ways of doing things just doesn't translate into what a modern developer-focused product should look like. I don't think you can go and grab run-of-the-mill product managers to go build, to go figure out like what the engineers should build next, especially when the engineers were like the end ICP for what you were building. So I knew we had to think about it differently. At the same time, we had to think differently about how you market developer products, right? A developer, or I would say product evangelists, have always existed in tech, but they were always kind of functions of classical marketing departments. And those departments function in vastly different ways that I would say modern developer relations or developer advocacy departments operate today. Where in that world, developer experience, you're kind of doing things for the long term. You're making bets today so you can reap the rewards later. These are activities you do to build community, to create an ecosystem, and these things compound over time, and you get to reap the benefits of it much later. But traditional marketing approaches heavily relied on very tactical things where they're easily measurable and easily attributable. And if you talk to any DevRel person now, this is one of their biggest frustrations. So we had to think about differently about product, think about differently about how we go to market, And then we also have to think a little bit about different about how those two things integrate back into the engineering work we had to do. So I felt that, to some degree, there was a compression of roles across all these things where we could have really solid engineers that were very good marketers as well. They were very good storytellers. They really wanted to talk about the things they were designing, and because they had a hand in developing the product, they were much more authentic when they were out there in the wild talking to hundreds of developers in front of large audiences. And so I liked that authentic approach. But the other part of it was just out of sheer necessity, like we were forced to almost kind of invent this because our competitors were the large companies. It was people like Microsoft and Amazon, and they were super well funded, and they could decide to do whatever they would like, relative to your market position, and then swarm planet Earth with their global developer advocacy teams. They could be anywhere all the time, always, and so you couldn't play the same game as them. You had to play differently. You just didn't have as much money as them. So these were kind of the underpinnings of why I thought, hey, we kind of need to create uh, a very good task force, which became the DX engineering department. And every person in that team kind of was like a member of the Avengers. Like one person was very good at like dealing with the Angular JS world. They were super tied into that, and they were respected in that community as well. So some of them were actually popular open source maintainers themselves.
Yeah.
So we would respect them because we were using their projects internally before we even hired on. So anyways, these were kind of some of the reasons.
Yeah, so Nina is in the DX department. Do you feel like in Avengers? What do you think about that?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I feel like there's just so much that is a multifaceted nature to this kind of role, and depending on the priorities, of course, of a company, you might index a bit more in one area than another, and might just have certain natural like skill sets that are more focused on one area than another. But I find it to be incredibly powerful and important and necessary, especially for just developer tools in general. Different mindsets, product mindset, a developer mindset, empathy, and a builder. It's a lot, and I love it.
Yeah, so we're talking about the fact that necessity brought a new role where kind of being able to tell the story and have that marketing instinct, but being rooted in the engineering, but also understanding like product, uh, puts you in the front, like and connect you all along and bring from all the development life cycle, let's say, of a product that is selling to developer. And now I'm thinking, is there any lessons here for the age of the era of AI? Like, what are the? This is not related necessarily to companies that are building dev tools. Any organization, they have engineering organization. We're seeing maybe the same like process as everybody basically DX. Now your audience is not just the your clients. Your audience is also your agents. You need to be able to tell them the story of what you're trying to achieve, give them the context, knowing what good looks like. So I'm kind of like wondering, do you think like there's any like learning here to what engineering managers need to think about of creating new role? And maybe I'll connect it to what actually good engineering look like. Which like previous or existing engineering teams inspired you? I think you talked about NASA, JPL, and SpaceX, etc. So basically, I'd love to hear, from your point of view, what good engineering looks like, what good engineering is going to look like, and what does it mean? Like, are we expected to see a new role that is helping to push the engineering to the next level?
Look, I think everyone's role is kind of changing at the moment. Everything's in flux. Maybe the titles might not change, but I think the responsibilities and scope of work will definitely change and has changed. So, we were talking about the DX engineer role, and as I mentioned, this was kind of a compression of multiple roles. We were effectively forcing, one individual to be more full stack. They had to kind of carry things from start to finish, and uh, and that made hiring for the role very hard because everybody was very, used to doing one thing. I'm just an engineer. All I do is code. No one sees me. No one talks to me. That kind of thing. The industry is just favors bucketizing people into, you are this, you are that, and don't steer away from that. And the org structures are set up around that, um, and the company cultures are set up around that, which is frankly the hardest part. But now with all these new, more intelligent tools, uh, I think the expectations are very different. I think we can now expect people to accomplish more in the same amount of time that's given to them, and with that also has to come more autonomy and more agency to like the individual, team member, where they can do more tasks, or kind of, I would say, not necessarily more task in volume individually, but more varied activity. Where, hey, I didn't just ship a feature, I didn't just make one PR today. I'm happy about that. And thankfully, there's some tests around it or something like that. They're thinking holistically about like, oh, this feature is a part of a holistic strategy for the company, and I understand that. I'm a contributor to that. I understand the end goal here. I understand how it impacts other things that we're doing, other initiatives. So I think the individual engineer is just becoming much more patched in to kind of the goals of the company, and I think that's great. But of course, that also comes with more responsibility, and I think leaders need to understand that. And I think this isn't going to happen overnight either. We're kind of onboarding and ramping up the entire industry and professionals that have worked for years doing things in a certain way. So I think that's the pressure now, which is how do we kind of retool and retask, everybody to be more full stack.
Yeah. I'm wondering, like, basically that we're saying like everyone becoming a little bit more full stack. Will that help quality or not? Like, I think you both have like experience from Cypress, like being a company at helping in quality, right? And also as an investor looking on the field and how it's evolving, like right now, like it's mostly chat. We moved from tap to chat, and now we're moving to agentic workflow, right? And basically, like with that evolution, people can do more with those chat and agentic workflow. And I wonder if it's helping quality or reducing quality. Like on one hand, for example, um, there are mistakes when you pass information from one human to another, and if it's everything in people, the same person end to end, then maybe there's less mistakes. On the other hand, let's admit it, a lot of the decisions and information is now actually moving into sessions with the agents, into decisions that are made during the reasoning of the coding, etc. So basically, like I think like code quality was always a big thing, like $1 trillion problem. Cypress being part of it, but I'm wondering if you're seeing it as someone experienced, also investors, something that's going to be even a bigger problem that we have to build new solutions, or actually like the fact that a person that can do end to end is going to reduce the quality issues.
I think with the power we have now with everything, I think the problem is going to be even more pronounced because we're trying to create more things faster, right? Um, and you mentioned something which is, is quality going to go down with this kind of new state of affairs, or up? Or is quality going to go down, for example, if you have one person doing more things? I think it will actually go up because that individual is now just not too distant from a lot of the decision making that had to happen, right? They're fully internalized it. They understand kind of the essence of what's trying to get done, which are sometimes not the things that gets captured in documents or anything else, right? Like everyone's much more aligned. I'll give you an example of this. We had at Cypress when we were kind of really trying to better integrate kind of this DX engineering approach to the rest of the company. So like one of our first projects was designing kind of this network interception API, and we had designed it using kind of this docs driven development. We kind of try to do a lot of that where we try to effectively say we're going to document this feature how we want the user to like experience this API, and then we're going to work backwards with the implementation. That's actually how we ended up solving the problem. But before we were doing this, and this is more widespread and common in the industry, we try to go kind of the specking and then direct implementation, and like, is the spec good enough? Was it sufficient? Did it really understand the technical hurdles of making this thing? And then we had an engineer go out and, it was a pretty, difficult thing to implement. And this person went out and technically did it. They technically did it. And, he came back and we were reviewing it and it was super complicated to use. Like I don't even think he even knew how to use it properly. And he just like got it done just barely. And then we went to document it and we were like, wow, this is super hard to explain. Like we took something that was supposed to be simple and it just feels icky, wrong. The quality doesn't seem to be there. It's not us. We weren't giving the kind of the experience that we wanted. And at that point, it was kind of like, all right, never again, never again. Like we're building very tough things to implement. And so we always got to work backwards from like the experience we want. And, this is kind of the classic Amazon style, if you will, where, Jeff Bezos is like famous for saying, we're going to write the press release first. And then
Yeah.
everyone works backwards from the press release. And I think you can do that for everything pretty much. Because if you don't end up with the final experience you want, you did it wrong. Go
Yeah.
back. Go back. Why ship it?
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you feel like basically what you're advocating for is instead of spec-driven development to do docs-driven development, and to some extent, and maybe that's actually today more possible than ever than when you folks tried it? And I think like this is something nice to speak to you, right? You're all day long working with open source and different tools, Codex, Claude, like etc. I think both of you are doing hands-on. Like, how do you think about that approach of docs-driven development?
My first thought is like, I could see how that is actually more very agent native, or at least it can be consumed in a way that could be context that's applied across different pipelines using agents to execute on different tasks. So that was initially what I thought of like, okay, this I can see this being a very forward thinking type of motion. What about you, Amir?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, there is no silver bullet of like, oh, it should be this way or or it should be some other way. I think you kind of have to pick and choose how you want to go about it. I think for some things, creating a standard spec, that's just it outlines what needs to get built, and then you just go build that. I think that's good enough for a lot of stuff. But when you're shipping stuff to people, and it's like a marketable aspect of your business and product. I think the docs driven approach gives you one additional thing, which is when you ship something, it almost ships with the narrative of what you're trying to put out there in the world, and that's kind of the key thing. Like, I think we've all went out and built really cool things that we think is really cool. Then when we go and try to like tell people about it, we have to go through this tough experience of the narrative piece, the storytelling. Oh, this is the problem you have, and you tried this and you tried that, it didn't work. But if you do it this way, it will work better. And let me tell you why. Like you have to kind of put all that together, and that's how people align with you, and adopt what you're building. And it actually allows you to be a little bit more opinionated when you have a narrative piece to things. And when it comes to developer tooling, opinions are gold because most people don't have opinions. And when you're someone that actually has one and it's rooted in something tangible and material, people will opt into that. They will anchor themselves to that. And more importantly, if you're trying to get adoption and awareness, they will they will almost champion what you're doing because now your opinion is their opinion. And they will fight the good fight for you every day. They'll become kind of a catalyst for your growth.
I'm gonna give my try, like predicting the future, very near future of how we're going to go with. So I'll use the old model view control. I think like the view are the docs. The control is the code and the LLMs. Like today, like it's very fused. Like almost every software is code and LLM calls, right? That's the code, that's control, and the view is the docs. And I think there will be a representation of the model, which is kind of intermediate, which is mostly actually for the agent themselves. I'll explain. Sometimes in the docs, yes, there is like here's what the APIs look like, and here's how the for example, the contract, or here are the capabilities, here are the behaviors. But if you like put too much information there, it's too much for human. Like actually, docs needs to be the essence of what you need to make it work. But the LLMs actually, the better, the more the merrier. Like you don't want to push everything into context. It's a different issue to how what do you know how to fetch to put in the context, but you need that all of these like structural elements to be quite established, so it could run with really high quality. So I actually believe that the future, let's call it just for the sake of shameless plug, Kodo Wiki, how it looks like. It's basically okay. You have your code base, and then and your usage of whatever libraries and AI, etc. Above that, there's like a model of like all the repo and their connections and the contracts and the models inside and the full graph, which is built for the agent. And every time there is a change, a code review agent can tell you, oh, you did a change according to your intent or not. And above that, it's like a document that is being built with human interface in the in the up. And I think it's like I wish to think that we are human better on some things, but we also need to admit that we're worse in other things. Like you don't go to a library, you go to Google. It's better than you searching. So the same thing here, we want to exploit the fact that models can absorb so much context in seconds. So you want to put that information for them, but for us, we need to have like a searchable, easy way. So I do think like docs as doc-driven development is going to be the future. Underneath, under the hood, there's actually a full spec that is actually written for the agent, something like that.
I totally agree with that. We need like a distilled view always for the human. And I've built things where then I ask the models to go like build me great docs, please spit it out, fancy. And it never really hits the mark. And I think one of the key essence of that is is that yes, it knows the features you built. It knows kind of like why this project exists and what the general goal is, but it never really kind of pins down the story
Yeah,
of it all. And if you start with that and then you feed the model, you start your project with that story component, I figured that the models will like keep remembering that. So
yeah,
every time you try to like discuss something new with it, it will bring that up and it will try to align itself to that. Um, and so and it kind of goes back to like the don't burden the human
yeah,
piece that you just mentioned. Like that's the critical part. I've had to like create docs for me, and I'm like, oh, I'm never gonna read this.
yeah, completely.
I'm gonna just hit the ask assistant thing button on the docs, and I'm just gonna have it distill for me. And maybe that's the answer, frankly.
Yeah,
Maybe that's what we should aim for. But I think even us as humans being able to distill kind of the narrative of what we want the world to think about what we've built is very important to spec driven development or just agentic engineering in general, right? I think that's going to be the core of it because if you think about it, when you're onboarding a new engineer or a PM or something like that, they go through all sorts of hurdles to figure out what this company is and what this company is about and who are these people about. But when we talk to models, like I feel like we don't do that upfront work for a lot of things, right? We're just so specific about like build me magical product, and there's just so much about the essence of maybe a company that gets lost in all of that. Um, but there's definitely something to like these things can burden the humans, in the way they output stuff.
I want to zoom out and ask you to each one of you a question. Zooming out, think about director of engineering, principal engineer, CTO. I know it's different roles. What do you feel from the field that there are challenges around quality? I think you're probably talking as an investor, etc., and Nina, like all day long, like you're in with the community. Like today, one or top or three things, the top things that those managers are thinking around quality in the age of AI, in the age of vibe coding turning into vibe engineering or grounded engineering. You like how do you think about that?
I think we've kind of crossed the chasm of people actually using these tools, so we don't have to talk about that. I feel like in the last year or two, it's been like, will these things will get adopted at all? So we can go past that. So now we're fully in the mode of like, how do we embed this, ingrain this into everything? And I think when it comes to, engineering leaders, uh, what I'm seeing is everyone's thinking about it, and this is the problem I'm personally fascinated by, like kind of eternally, which is software factories. How do we kind of build the machine that builds the machine? And and in solving that problem, you have to kind of deduce the whole software lifecycle into these key areas, and you have to rethink all of them because you probably are doing some facet of it already, and now you have to map it into your company's factory for building software. So maybe we can break that down. Um, so Everyone's kind of approaching it in their own special way. Everyone's journey just to kind of, attacking this problem, as I've seen it, has just been like very different. But maybe let's take a little bit of a detour, bring it back to like the quality piece, and then we'll bring it back to software factories. So the thing was, in the past, we try to tell people, please test your software. Please write as many tests as you possibly can. Please use CI and actually run it. You know, please do all that. And people did their best to whatever degree they could. Maybe on some days it was a bad day. They didn't really do it. But what happened was there was no super hardcore rigor around a lot of this stuff. Even though the people that maybe did it a lot want to say they were super rigorous, but I think as an industry as a whole, we did not really do it rigorously. And I don't think it's people's fault necessarily. I think we were asking too much of people. We were saying, "Hey, ship fast. It better be good, and you better maintain your tests, and your CI better be always passing." Right?
You can get fast, cheap, and good, right?
Yeah, you were asking a
Until
lot and
today.
get it.
Until today.
Yeah, yeah, till today, yeah. We're saying, "Hey, get it done by Friday," right? It was a lot. It was a lot. It was like, we're telling the world to, like, "Please work out, please eat your broccoli, please have enough protein," right? And it's like, well, uh, I went hard last night, so I don't know if I can. And, it was a tall order. And a key portion of that was just people not writing tests, and I think the industry as a whole didn't really know how to do it. We just told engineers, "Write tests, good luck." And there was not a whole lot of education around doing that kind of stuff. Like, it's definitely not taught in computer science programs, right? Like, and probably it probably only gets brought up so they grade your tests to make sure you you fulfilled, like, whatever the professor wanted. So there was a lack of education in that part. But, we pushed it on the industry anyways, and people did their best, and, billions, lines of code of tests were written. And the thing was, some people ran them, and I think over time, many people just stopped trusting it. They lost confidence in it because it just became this huge bottleneck for a lot of folks. Many were happy enough, they got by, their CI runtime ballooned a lot because, hey, I'm waiting for like the billions of tests to run.
I hate that.
I know, I know. It was a huge bottleneck and it dragged on everything. But we did it anyways because it was the right thing to do. And some of us tried to take a lot of shortcuts. And then we were telling people, okay, you've lost confidence in your test suite. What else are you hanging on to? Well, it's like, well, I have decent code coverage. Like, well, we did some visual regression testing, so like that's decent. So people try to use these other kind of tangential things to try to enforce quality. But we never really won it as an industry. Like, we never really nailed that. And because we were in the software world, it was very easy to sidestep it. Like, I started my career in the hardware world where it's like that is life. Like, you cannot take shortcuts or like people die. But in software, we're like, hey, I'm just shipping a wine app, like maybe it's not that important that the test passed today. But now, where we're now like have this opportunity to think what a software factory is, and a core component of any factory is like quality assurance. And now we get to rethink this stuff. And let's break that down. I think code review, of course, I think is the first line of defense for everything. We're slinging code. So, yes, we should have reasonable code review processes in place. I found them to be really useful in my own workflows. It's crazy how much stuff it catches that's actually real, too. And I run them both in the kind of my inner loop workflow and my outer loop workflow as well. I try to run as much as I can in the inner loop before I kind of get it out into some PR or something. That was one piece. So the next level up from that was like, let's generate tests. Oh, I don't have to write tests anymore because the AI can write tests. And so right now, AI is slinging code on the test front. It's creating a bunch of tests. And I feel great as a developer. I'm like, wow, I could have never written all these things myself. I couldn't even come up with all the test cases, no matter how hard I try, right? That was like one of the key issues. But hey, at least I have a little bit more confidence, and my AI is definitely soothing me on that department. I don't know how good it is yet, but it's definitely doing something. And the other part of that, which is kind of like the thing we all ignore in this industry as much as possible until something breaks, is security. Most developers have no clue how to manage security at all. Like, they're never really taught what that means. And I think now, it kind of in complement to code review, we're also getting better security reviews. And these models are, of course, getting much better at that. So if you kind of deduce all of that, like, we have kind of these building blocks for building a software factory. We have code review systems. We have kind of improved ways of writing tests and hopefully validating them. And now we have better security tests as well. And I've kind of invested into all these buckets as well as part of my strategy.
I'd love to dig in more on the AI factory, but Nina, like, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What are these things that the top one, two, three, like challenges around software development, specifically could be around quality for CTOs, technical leaders, etc.
A few things that I'm hearing um, engineering leaders complain about, or maybe more so, they're worried about and want to prepare and solve for what they think will happen at the rate that the as a result of the way in which the life cycle is changing and the rate at which code is being produced. It needs to still get through the pipeline to reap the benefits of the speed from like code generation. I think it's about how do you actually consistently control and enforce that quality. And it starts to feel like there needs to be more determinism, or at least the feeling of a deterministic quality gates or tools that are being leveraged. And there's also a fear around, I think, the visibility. There's about proof that all of the goals around actually integrating AI will are being paid off in some way, and that they can actually show that. And so then that kind of begs the question that reintroduces, well, like, is the code looking and functioning the way that it's supposed to, or the way that we intend, while we also reap the gains of like increased developer productivity. So proof and yeah, those are some of the things I'm seeing.
That reminded me of two stories I heard from customers or people out there at X. One case, like I heard one person saying like they are now generating 30x more code than they had like the same amount of time last year. It sounded to me a lot, like, but actually feasible. I'm looking at myself as the CEO, how much code I can generate these days, despite being the CEO, and it felt feasible. But after like a good glass of wine, it was exposed that actually the amount of code that shipped to production was 30% more. So what's happening in between? Like 30x more generated to 30% more being shipped is a lot about throwing PRs to the garbage, not passing through gates and all that needing to be refactored or whatever. And that's actually related to the second point. Like I felt that you share that it's another thing that I'm hearing more from customers and from the market is that maybe it's not the same engineering technology and user interface between what helps us to generate code, what helps us to verify code. The whole idea, the whole reason that we are capable to do code generation because these LLMs are statistical creatures that to some extent work like the human brain and enable that creativity and solving and understanding and reasoning and all that. But then on the gating, on the gateway and gatekeeping, maybe we need like more rigorous. And what you're saying is that maybe more determinism. So I guess it won't be fully deterministic because otherwise, like, I think these tools won't be able to catch up. But probably like what I'm hearing from the market is that there is a huge like demand of I don't want it a code review or code governance or whatever to be exactly the same as coding. I need it to be more deterministic, more rigorous, more report building and all that. That's definitely like resonating to what I'm hearing. And maybe that's back to you, Amir, like on the AI factory. How do you imagine like AI factory coming to life, like let's say 2027?
Well, I think one thing we get that's pretty nice now, which we couldn't have before, is feedback systems as part of all this. We've never really had that in software development. You know, everything was pretty linear. You built something, you passed it through some linear process, and then hopefully it went through all your checks. But as you were saying, hey, maybe the code review experience is going to be look very different than the coding agent experience, right? Like that part's important because what I find is that my code review output should feed back into how I do coding in the first place. And it should help me actually write those better specs. Because hey, I wrote the spec, I implemented it, now I'm running code review on it. But wow, it is catching a lot of things. And at some point, I'm like, okay, it's catching so much that maybe there was something wrong upstream. Like maybe I didn't spec things, maybe I didn't think about this problem long enough, and the code review is really highlighting that for me. I mean, it does that a lot. It surfaces kind of scenarios and cases that I didn't think about at all. No matter how much of a conversation I had with the agent, and no matter how much I asked the agent to go do this particular research or that particular research. So I think feedback systems are going to be critical to that, both at code review point and all, of course, also at the security layer as well. And I think there has to be a good governance story of how all these things merge into the broader processes of spec generation and on all the guardrails as well.
It's interesting to double click on when the coding agent are working. Why, to begin with, they didn't generate the right code or high quality code. And I think like maybe we can, put the framework of there is the context and the harnessing of AI in that context, right? And I think like maybe the coding agents are missing because A, they have a different context, and B, maybe they're harnessing that context differently. And what I'm hearing from you is that, okay, if this is the case, then A, maybe I need to close the loop between these tools and make it one big machine yin and yang. And the second thing I think I heard you discuss a little bit in other blogs and podcasts about building your own context because of this. Like you want to build your own context to feed the coding agent to begin with to do the right thing. Like, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's context management has been helpful. It hasn't fully solved, I think, some of these issues because I still see the agents definitely getting tunnel vision sometimes. Maybe I don't know if it's the models or the harness. I think it's improved even in the last month, frankly. But I've definitely seen it go down paths where I'm like, whoa, 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 what are you doing now? Like, I thought we discussed this. I thought we were pretty clear and aligned on what to do here. Yeah, happy to share with you how I've kind of managed it.
Yeah, please do.
Um, so I mean, I have kind of like this broad system and setup I've built to help me with this, where no matter what I'm trying to build, I I kind of have a method to break it down into kind of this phased implementation rollout, and each phase has all these gates. It has entry gates and it has exit gates. And then for each gate, it also has its own like way to test each of them as it's going as well. So I can't go from phase 1 to phase 2 if the entry and exit gates are not set up properly. And I think more and more people are kind of adopting this method. Mine, I kind of when I built it, it was kind of out of sheer necessity because I was trying to have it do more long horizon work, and I don't think it can do it without kind of this kind of structure. It is super annoying though. It's rigorous, but yeah, it definitely like it forces the agent to work much longer than maybe probably needs sometimes. But I'm just trying to get a confident output on that part. And by the way, some of the gating for some if an implementation phase to be done is heavily reliant on kind of custom code reviews. So like each phase has its own review instructions as part of it. So everything's bespoke to the particular thing you're building. It's not like I'm doing generic code review on that process. So it's worked out really well. And I think some of these coding harnesses now having kind of this goal mode now. I mean, like I'm pretty codex pilled, frankly, at this point. Right? Yeah, all love for Claude and all that. But uh, but it's been great, and I'm getting. I think that's driving a lot better results.
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of taste matters. What you're saying. What about you, Nina?
First of all, definitely a Codex fan as well. I use goal mode all the time, but I did wanna, add to the whole context management thing that is actually another one of the biggest things I hear, engineering leaders are kind of struggling with, or one of their pain points is, like, they understand the value of context for on different levels for, like, the individual developer completing a task to, like, a whole team being able to access certain types of context that is working in their favor across the software development lifecycle. And it's like, but how do you actually implement this? Like, what does that actually look like? If that's architecturally, if that's a product to leverage, how do you actually integrate this to become successful? So that's an interesting point.
So we're getting toward the end, and I hear that I heard a lot about like managing your context, building those loops, creating that governance and control observability about the AI factory. And I have maybe a easy, maybe a hard question for you: build versus buy. Where do you think we're going with it as an investor? Like, right, it really matters, and even in any like, would you building more of your tools, or you using tools out there, or what other people are doing these days? You want to start, Nina?
Sure. So what do I think about what we should do with build versus buy?
Yeah,
And
like what do engineering leaders need to do, like build versus buy?
I think one of the metrics to determine if you want to build or buy should be, if I build this thing, what amount of like engineering resources would I be allocating to building this thing, and what is the opportunity cost of that? Am I taking them away from contributing to the core product? I think that is a major question that could actually really help to get you closer to an answer.
Focus on your core business is has always kind of been the key, argument against building versus buying. I do think a few things are different now. Uh, one, uh, in the past, like, you kind of saw this in the zero interest rate phenomena era, where people overhired and just had too much money. So a lot of companies actually, uh, of course, people were sliding their corporate credit cards to buying whatever a tool and option was out there. But what we saw was a lot of companies just had so many engineers that they had so much free time, apparently, that they wanted to just build everything. And of course, when it comes to developer focused things, engineers like, what do you mean? I can just build tools for myself and get paid for it? Like, that sounds awesome. So you saw a lot of that. But then the second the zero rate phenomenon died down, all that went away. All that went away because now it's like, oh, now you got to get rid of all these engineers that you probably didn't need on hand, because we were overhired, and now no one's there to maintain any of this stuff they made that we supposedly rely on. So this kind of burden of maintenance always remains when you're trying to build something. Um, and do you want to burn your tokens on that? That's the kind of key questions that think leaders have to ask. Like, are you the best set of people to maintain that thing? And look, some companies, they're just culturally set up to build. If you look at companies like Uber, or, of that nature, they always love building things from the ground up, and I get that to some degree. But I think for the vast portions of companies out there, like, they should be buying instead of building, and just kind of focus on the core task at hand, regardless of how enticing it is to kind of, whip it up yourself, in a week or so. It is very attractive, but I think people should be pretty reluctant to do that.
What I'm seeing in the market is that there's a new thing. Instead of build versus buy, there's build to buy. Like, you are enticed to build something in a week. And if it does work, you're actually happy because, like you mentioned, like, you want to manage your context. You want to build those loops. You want to make the product, the solution you're building in your taste. It matters. And if you can do that with one or two, three people for a week or two, and then they probably need to keep working on it and maintaining it, why not? But the worst case scenario, which I'm not saying like a 1 week or 2 week or a month of two developers is a lot, but the worst case scenario, when you're going to buy, your shit. Sorry for my French. Like, you know what to ask, what you didn't manage to do, what you have to have in the solution, but you couldn't do it yourself because there's a lot of tokens to be burned in engineering and harnessing and flavor and taste that was put there. So that's what I feel.
Like, one thing about this is that, and you probably see this all the time, I'm sure that companies building their own code review tools is probably one of the most enticing things they would want to do. So you said build to buy, and I think sometimes you have to build it to appreciate why you need to maybe buy it. And I've tried actually building my own code review agents as well,
Oh,
and I run them
really?
along. I'm sorry. Uh, but I did it for the sake of kind of intellectual curiosity of, like, oh, like, what do you have to get right to this? And I think you very quickly realize why, and I still don't know your secret sauce, at Demar, on this front of, like, how you're able to surface certain, bugs that, no matter how hard I tried, some of these my code review agents couldn't find. And I do that sometimes as an investor
Yeah.
to, because you said build to buy. Sometimes what I do is I try to build so I can figure out if I should invest.
Yeah. Build to
Because
invest.
it's built to invest. Yeah, because if I can cook it up super quickly and it's pretty good, then yeah, maybe that's not a hard enough problem. to solve for the market, and I shouldn't invest in that. But when I try to go after some of these problems, and you're quickly humbled by the difficulty of it, then you're like, okay, yeah, people should be definitely, seeing what's out there in the market.
Oh, I would just like to add about the Uber piece, because you said that they are very comfortable with building. So I wrote an article about them a couple months ago because they had built their own AI code review tool. And because at that point, it was the fall of 2025, the capabilities of the tools that they were testing to potentially buy were just not there to match the constraints that they had for, enterprise engineering org. So they went and they built their own. And I want an update so badly. They published an article about it then. I want an update on how that is going now with just how much that has changed in the market, in the space, with not only just like LLMs, but the features, capabilities, on-prem deployments that are available with these tools. And if that's something they would continue investing in.
Yeah, yeah. So if someone from Uber is listening, please follow up with Nina.
Just before we ask where to find you, etc., last one. What do you think the industry is not talking loudly enough? Probably you're thinking about like next year, that isn't talk about right now. And like, I don't know, like, is there areas of governance or a future problem that, like what people are going to be fired because of next year that they need to think about this year? Love to hear.
It's almost like everything, right? Because I feel like we're at the moment where we're forced to rethink everything. I think one topic that I see now come up over and over again, and I'm glad we're discussing it, is the stuff we started with at the beginning of our conversation, which is like, what are the roles going to look like long term? Some of us that are kind of at the edge of it all, we think we have a decent idea of it, and some of at startup layer, we're kind of building these companies from the ground up with that in mind. But I think the real test of all this and the real kind of societal level conversation we need to have is like, what does an engineer's role really look like moving forward? What are the expectations? How does that map to other departments in a company? What do other departments even look like? These things are all overlapping, and I think as we have kind of industry leaders listening to our discussion here today, I think that's the conversation they need to not be shy about, which I've seen people are pretty shy about it because it does touch a nerve on a lot of things. I think we can figure it out, but we need to have more of a discourse around it. And I see many podcasts out there that are kind of poking at the topic, and we should do more and more of that.
Yeah, that's why we're here. So where can we find you? And Dana, where can we find you?
You can find me on X. Just look up my name, Amir, and I have a very easy email. It's amir@investor.dev. People are pretty surprised by the domain name, so you can reach
Nice.
out to me there.
Yeah, when I saw that, I was like, how? Like, I just need to know how you acquired that. But
It was available. I was the first owner.
Forward thinking. Dana, where to reach you out?
I am definitely always on X. That's where I yak the most. So at Nana Hacks, so my first name and Hacks is where I'm always talking about these exact conversations that we're having here. So glad that we could do this.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amir. That was really, really great.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
If today's conversation challenged how you think about AI and code quality, that's the point.
At Kodo, we believe that independent, context-aware code review with rules as guardrails is how engineering teams maintain standards at scale.
If you're leading an enterprise team and want to see how intelligent AI code review can reinforce governance, visibility, and accountability in your workflow, visit Kodo.ai to learn how we help teams turn AI productivity into production-ready quality.
And if you enjoyed this episode, subscribe, share it with your engineering leadership circle, and leave us a review.
Until next time, keep human in the loop.
And keep shipping.